Old age is no joy, my mother used to say. She was only 60 when she passed away. I am now 73, and I still remember her words. Perhaps she was right, but I have my own opinion on the matter. Old age is freedom. Freedom to say what you think without worrying about what others think. Freedom not to smile when you don't want to. And freedom to see right through people. Garth, my husband of 48 years, thinks I don't notice him checking his phone under the table during dinner. He thinks I don't see him deleting messages. Men of his generation underestimate women my age. They think we are blind, deaf, and naive. That is their mistake. I sat in my favorite chair on the porch of our house, in a quiet neighborhood in Richmond, and looked out at the autumn garden. 42 years ago, Garth and I bought this house. He was a young, promising engineer, and I was an accountant with a practical approach to money. Practicality is what helped us survive all of Garth's financial crises and failed investments. How many times did I save our family budget? How many times did I find ways to patch up the holes after his brilliant ideas? And not once did I hear a word of gratitude. My father, Hammond Lander, always said that I married a worthless man. He was right about many things, but not this. Garth is not worthless. He is just weak. Weak people are more dangerous than useless people. They are always looking for ways to compensate for their weakness, usually at the expense of others. My father never approved of my choice. However, he rarely approved of anything in my life. A successful owner of a chain of hardware stores, he always wanted a son who would continue his business. Instead, he had me, a stubborn, headstrong girl who saw all the flaws in his business model and wasn't afraid to speak up about them. "You're too smart for a woman, Eunice," he said to me once when I was 16. "Whew, it will scare away all the decent men." "If they're scared off by intelligence, then they're not worthy enough," I replied. He laughed and looked at me with something resembling respect for the first time. But that didn't change our relationship. I was a disappointment he had learned to tolerate. 15 years ago, when I retired, my father unexpectedly offered me the position of CFO in his company. By that time, his chain of stores had grown to 20 locations across the state. I refused. He took it as a personal insult. We didn't speak for 5 years. A phone call interrupted my thoughts. The number was unidentified. "Mrs. Lander?" asked a formal male voice. "Yes, that's me," I replied, sitting up straight in my chair. "My name is Obadiah Frost, and I am the attorney for your father, Hammond Lander. I am very sorry to inform you that Mr. Lander passed away last night." Strangely, my first feeling was not grief, but surprise. My father was 92 years old, but he always seemed indestructible, eternal, like the mountains or the ocean. "What happened?" I asked, surprised at my own calmness. "A heart attack. He was in his office, quickly and, as far as we know, painlessly." I nodded, even though the other person couldn't see me. "I need to inform you," the lawyer continued, "that you are named in Mr. Lander's will. Your presence is required at the reading of the will the day after tomorrow at 2 o'clock in my office." He dictated the address, which I wrote down on a piece of paper. My hand didn't shake. "Will anyone else be present?" I asked. "Yes. Other relatives mentioned in the will. I cannot disclose any details until the official reading." After the call, I sat motionless for a long time. My father had died. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea. Our relationship had always been complicated, but in recent years, we had found something resembling mutual understanding. After my mother's death, he had softened and started calling once a month. Last Christmas, he even invited Garth and me over for dinner. The front door slammed. Garth was back. I heard him rustling bags in the kitchen, humming something to himself. Lately, He had seemed unusually lively, often leaving the house for unclear reasons. We had long lived like neighbors, politely, distantly, each in our own world. But in the last 2 weeks, something new had appeared in his behavior. Something alarming. I got up and went into the house. Garth was putting away the groceries. When he saw me, he smiled too broadly. "I bought your favorite wine, dear." "How about a candlelit dinner tonight?" He hadn't suggested a candlelit dinner in the last 5 years, and he certainly didn't remember my favorite wine. "My father died," I said instead of answering. His face froze for a moment, then took on an expression of false grief. "Oh, Eunice, I'm so sorry. When did it happen?" "Last night. Heart attack." I watched his reaction closely. Something flashed in his eyes. Relief? Impatience? He came over and hugged me, patting me awkwardly on the back. "How are you? Hanging in there?" "I'm fine," I pulled away. "The will is being read the day after tomorrow, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon." Now I saw it clearly, a flash of eager interest in his eyes. "The will? Did he include you? After everything?" "Apparently, yes." Garth turned away, pretending to be busy with the groceries, but his shoulders tensed. "I wonder how much he left you," he said casually. "I don't know. The lawyer didn't give any details." Of course, of course." He waved his hand. "But your father was a wealthy man." "Very wealthy." There was reverence in his voice. Garth always treated wealth with an almost religious awe. Money was his god, and he had spent his entire life trying to earn its favor, failing time and time again. "That was a long time ago," I replied. "Who knows how things stand now?" The fact that I never asked my father about his finances always annoyed Garth. He considered it a sign of stupidity. I considered it a sign of dignity. "I'm going to open the wine anyway," he said, pulling the bottle out of the bag. "You need to relax. You're in shock, even though you're not showing it." It was true. I was indeed in shock, but not from my father's death, but from Garth's reaction. 48 years of marriage, and he still didn't understand that I could see right through him. I watched him bustle around the kitchen, preparing dinner with unusual enthusiasm, and remembered our early years together. Back then, there was still sincerity in him. When did it disappear? Or was it never there, and I just saw what I wanted to see? The evening passed in a strange atmosphere. Garth was unusually attentive, asking about my father and our relationship in recent years. I responded cautiously, watching as he poured me wine and looked at me appraisingly. After dinner, he suggested we watch a movie, an old comedy we used to love. I agreed, but I couldn't concentrate on the screen. "You're going to the reading of the will, aren't you?" he asked during the commercials. "Of course." "I could go with you." For moral support. "You don't have to, Garth." "No, no, I insist." He took my hand. "We're family." At times like this, we need to be together. His fingers were damp and cold. I couldn't remember the last time he had held my hand. Probably 10 years ago, at his brother's funeral. "Okay," I agreed, "if you want to." I couldn't sleep that night. Garth had been snoring in his room for a long time. We had been sleeping separately for the last 15 years, and I lay there staring at the ceiling. Something was bothering me. Something about my husband's behavior, his sudden attentiveness. It wasn't normal, and this abnormality coincided with my father's death and the news about the will. In the morning, I went down to the kitchen earlier than usual. Garth was already there, talking on the phone. When he saw me, he abruptly fell silent and turned away. "Yes, everything's fine. We'll talk later," he said quickly and hung up. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, pouring myself some coffee. Huh? Oh, it was Brinkley from the golf club. About tomorrow's game, Brinkley from the golf club. Garth hadn't played golf in 2 years, ever since he started having knee problems, and he had never mentioned any Brinkley. Weren't you going to come with me to the lawyer tomorrow? I reminded him. Oh, right. He slapped his forehead. I completely forgot. Of course, I'll cancel golf. He began to fuss about making breakfast, clattering the dishes too loudly. I watched him from behind my coffee mug. Suddenly, he froze and turned to me. By the way, how are you going to get to the lawyer's office? My car, as usual. Ah. He nodded and turned away again. Right, of course. Something in his tone made me wary. What? Nothing. Just thought maybe I should order a taxi, so you don't have to worry about parking downtown. Since when did Garth care about parking? This man could drive around the neighborhood for half an hour, looking for a free spot just to avoid paying for parking. I prefer my car, I said. It has comfortable seats for my back. Of course, he quickly agreed. Just a suggestion. After breakfast, Garth said he was going to the grocery store. Again, even though yesterday he had bought so much that the refrigerator was stuffed to the brim. I didn't comment. When he left, I sat motionless for a while, then stood up decisively. It was time to find out what was going on. I went into his study, a small room on the first floor that he proudly called his office. It smelled of stale tobacco smoke. Garth thought I didn't know about his secret cigarettes. And unwashed cups. His desk was littered with bills and advertising flyers. I methodically looked through the papers, but found nothing of interest. The computer was turned off, and I didn't know the password. The desk drawers were locked. Strange, he never used to lock them. At that moment, I realized how little I knew about the life of the man I had lived with for almost half a century. What did he do all day? Who did he talk to? What did he think about? We had long since become strangers, maintaining only the appearance of a family. The phone rang, making me jump. It was my niece Beryl, the daughter of my late brother Malcolm. Aunt Eunice! I just got a call from Grandpa's lawyer. Do you know yet? Beryl was 36, and she had inherited my father's business acumen and my brother's complete lack of tact. Yes, I was informed yesterday, I replied. Are you going to the reading of the will? Of course. Oh, her voice sounded disappointed. I thought it might be difficult for you. At your age. At my age. That phrase had haunted me for the last 10 years. At my age, I was supposed to sit at home, knit socks, and not interfere in the affairs of the young and energetic, such as Beryl. I feel fine. Thank you for your concern, I replied dryly. I just wanted to say that I can represent your interests if you don't want to go. Of course she didn't want to. Beryl always wanted to be at the center of everything, especially when it came to money. Don't worry, I can handle it myself. Well, as you wish. A capricious note appeared in her voice. I just wanted to help. After talking to Beryl, my anxiety intensified. She never called just like that, always with some purpose. And her insistent desire to represent my interests seemed suspicious. The day passed in a strange stupor. I tried to read but couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to my father, his sudden death, Garth's behavior, Beryl's call. My husband came home late that evening, smelling of alcohol. He said he had met an old friend, and they had sat around for a while. I didn't ask any questions. We ate dinner in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. That night, I dreamed of my father. He was standing in his study, the very one where he had died, looking at me reproachfully. You've always been too trusting, Eunice, he said in my dream. You've turned a blind eye to the obvious for too long. I woke up in a cold sweat. Dawn was breaking outside the window. Tomorrow the will would be read. Tomorrow I would find out what my father had left me and why Garth and Beryl were acting so strangely. Something was coming, something inevitable, like a storm, and I felt that my life was about to change forever. The morning of the will reading was cloudy. Heavy clouds hung over Richmond, promising rain. I woke up early, long before the alarm clock rang. Sleep had brought no rest. All night, I had been haunted by fragments of memories of my father, mixed with a vague anxiety. After lying in bed for a few minutes, I got up carefully, trying not to strain my sore back, and went to the window. The garden looked dreary in the gray morning light. The leaves of the maple tree that Garth and I had planted 30 years ago were beginning to turn yellow. Another season is passing, I thought. Another year of my life. Garth was still asleep in the next room. His snoring, muffled by the wall, reminded me of the physical presence of a man who had long since become emotionally absent to me. When exactly did that happen? When did the lively, enthusiastic man I married turn into this irritable, withdrawn old man? And when did I stop hoping for change? It probably happened after our son Laird left for college 26 years ago. The nest was empty, and we were left alone with each other, suddenly realizing we had nothing left to talk about. Laird was our bridge, our common ground. Without him, the gap between us grew wider and wider. Laird now lived in Seattle with his family, called once a month, and came home for Christmas. His visits were always short and left me feeling unsatisfied. I knew he noticed the tension between me and Garth, but we never discussed it. In our family, it was not customary to talk about feelings. I stood in the shower for a long time, letting the hot water wash away my fatigue. Today promised to be a difficult day, not because of the reading of the will. I didn't care much about what my father had left me. Rather, it was because of Garth's strange behavior. After my shower, I dressed carefully, choosing a strict dark blue suit. My father valued restraint in clothing and manners. That was probably the only quality he approved of in me. When I went down to the kitchen, Garth was already there, drinking coffee and reading the news on his tablet. When he saw me, he hurriedly turned off the screen. "Good morning," he said with feigned cheerfulness. "How did you sleep?" "Not great," I replied, pouring myself some coffee. "How about you?" "Wonderful. Couldn't be better." He seemed unusually animated for someone who was about to accompany his wife to the reading of her recently deceased father's will. His eyes were sparkling, his cheeks slightly flushed. I noticed that he had shaved particularly carefully and was wearing his best sweater, the one I had given him 3 years ago, which he only wore on special occasions. "You're up early," I remarked. "Yes, I couldn't sleep anymore." I decided to check the weather forecast. They say it's going to rain, another lie. Garth had never been interested in the weather forecast. He didn't care what was happening outside. "I think I'll leave at 1 o'clock, I said, "so I won't be late." "Great idea." He nodded enthusiastically. "I'll be ready." We ate breakfast in tense silence. Garth tried several times to strike up a conversation about the weather, the news, even gardening, which he had never shown any interest in. I answered in monosyllables, watching him. Something was wrong, something very serious. After breakfast, he announced that he needed to pick something up at the dry cleaners. Another oddity. Garth hadn't used the dry cleaners in years, preferring that I wash his clothes at home. When he left, I sat at the kitchen table, thinking about our marriage. 48 years. Almost half a century with the man who started out as the love of my life and ended up as a roommate. When did this transformation happen? Was it a gradual process, or was there a moment, a point of no return, that I missed? I remembered our early years together, Garth worked as an engineer for a construction company, and I was an accountant at a small firm. We were young, full of energy and plans. He dreamed of starting his own business, and I supported him. We saved every dollar, denied ourselves entertainment, and put money aside for a great future. After 5 years, Garth decided it was time. He quit his job and invested all our savings in a small consulting firm. The first few months were promising. Then the problems began. The competition turned out to be tougher than he expected. Clients were reluctant to hire a newcomer. A year later, the firm went bankrupt, and we lost everything. Garth took the failure hard. He became irritable and withdrawn. At night, I could hear him pacing around the house, unable to sleep. I tried to support him, but he pushed me away, as if my sympathy was yet another reminder of his failure. He got a new job, and we started over. I got pregnant, and Laird was born. For a while, Garth's former enthusiasm returned. He made plans for his son's future, imagining how he would teach him to fish, play baseball, and fix cars. Reality turned out to be different. Laird grew up to be a quiet, thoughtful boy, more interested in books than sports. Garth did not hide his disappointment. He tried not to show it to his son, but I saw how he was distancing himself, how he was losing interest in family matters. When Laird turned 10, Garth decided to take another risk. This time, he invested money in the restaurant business, becoming a partner with an old friend. History repeated itself. 2 years later, the restaurant closed, leaving us with debts. This became the pattern of our lives. Garth would get excited about a new idea, invest money, fail, and fall into depression. Each time, I would pick up the pieces, find ways to pay off the debts, and keep the family afloat. And each time, I hoped he would learn his lesson. But he didn't. At 65, he retired, full of bitterness over his unfulfilled ambitions. My job as an accountant, which he always considered too mundane and unimaginative, ultimately provided us with a stable retirement. It was an irony of fate that he never accepted. For the last 8 years, we had lived parallel lives. Garth spent his days watching television, occasionally meeting other retirees at the local bar. I gardened, read, and occasionally attended art exhibitions with friends. We hardly spoke, except about everyday matters. And now this sudden excitement, this unnatural interest in my affairs. What had changed? I looked at my watch. 12:30. It was time to get ready. Garth wasn't back yet, and that suited me fine. I would have preferred to go alone, but he showed up at exactly 12:55, out of breath and excited. "Sorry I'm late," he said, taking off his jacket. "I ran into Brinkley and we got to talking." That mysterious Brinkley again. I decided not to comment. "I'm almost ready," I said, putting on my coat. "Meet me in the car." "I can drive if you want," Garth offered, with unexpected thoughtfulness. "No, thank you. I prefer to drive myself." He pursed his lips but didn't insist. I left the house, leaving him to get changed. The day was gray and damp, just as I had expected. My car, a 10-year-old sedan, was parked in the driveway. A simple, reliable car, just like my whole life. I opened the door and got behind the wheel. I put my bag on the passenger seat and took out my keys. Then I heard a shout, "Mrs. Lander!" "Wait!" I turned my head and saw a man running toward me. He was tall and thin, with a long gray beard and a worn jacket. It was Zeke Patterson, a local homeless man whom I sometimes saw at Peggy's, a diner on the corner of our street. Zeke wasn't your typical homeless person. Rumor had it that he used to teach philosophy at a college until his drinking ruined his career. I didn't know if that was true, but he was definitely different from other vagrants. He spoke intelligently, often quoted the classics, and never begged. Sometimes I would buy him coffee and a sandwich at the diner, and we would chat a little. Now Zeke looked alarmed. He ran up to the car, breathing heavily, his eyes wide open. "Mrs. Lander, don't start that car!" he blurted out. I looked at him in surprise. "Zeke? What's wrong?" He glanced back at the house, as if afraid we might be overheard. "Your husband," he said quietly, leaning toward the open window. I saw him last night. He was doing something to your car, with some young woman." I froze. The key in my hand stopped halfway to the ignition. "What do you mean?" "What was he doing?" "I don't know exactly." Zeke looked back again. "I was sitting behind the trash cans at the house next door." They didn't see me. Your husband opened the hood, and the woman was holding a flashlight. They were doing something to the engine. I heard them talking about brakes. My breath caught in my throat. Brakes. Garth's unexpected offer to call a taxi. His strange interest in my car. "Are you sure?" I asked, feeling the blood run cold in my veins. "Absolutely," Zeke nodded. "I may be an old alcoholic, but my eyes and ears still work. They were here around 9 o'clock tonight. Your husband and a young woman, dark-haired, slim, wearing an expensive coat. Beryl? It could only be her. But why would they need to do something with my car? And why now? My father's will, the meeting with the lawyer. Suddenly, everything fell into place in a terrifying picture. "Mrs. Lander?" Zeke looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly, removing the key from the ignition. "Yes, Zeke. Thanks to you, I'm perfectly fine." At that moment, the front door of the house opened and Garth appeared on the threshold. Seeing Zeke by the car, he froze. "What's going on?" he shouted, quickly descending the steps. "Is this man bothering you, Eunice?" Zeke stepped away from the car, his face tense. "It's okay, Garth," I replied calmly. "Mr. Patterson was just asking if we had any old blankets left for the shelter." Zeke gave me a grateful look and quickly walked away. Garth watched him suspiciously, then walked over to the car. "Strange guy," he said, opening the passenger door. "Are you sure he didn't want money?" "Absolutely," I said, putting the keys in my bag. "You know, I've changed my mind." "Let's call a taxi." "You're right. It'll be difficult to park downtown." Garth froze, his hand on the door handle. "Really?" "But you love driving your car." "I'm not in the mood today," I shrugged. "My back hurts. Besides, if it rains, I don't want to look for a parking spot." "Okay," he agreed too quickly. "I'll call a cab right now." While he fiddled with his phone, I looked at my car. What exactly had they done to it? Ruined the brakes? Caused a fuel leak? Something else that could lead to an accident on the way to the lawyer? And most importantly, why? What was in my father's will that made my husband and niece take such a step? "The taxi will be here in 10 minutes, Garth said, putting his phone in his pocket. "Let's go inside. There's no point in freezing outside." I let him take my arm and lead me back to the house. His hand was warm and confident, just like it used to be. But now I knew that this hand could be the cause of my death. "Don't worry," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "Everything will be fine." And I almost believed him. His voice sounded so sincere. Almost, but not quite. Because after Zeke Patterson's warning, I knew for sure. My husband and my niece wanted me dead before the will was read. The taxi moved slowly through the streets of Richmond, swerving around puddles left over from the night's rain. Through the foggy glass, the city looked blurry, like a watercolor painting flooded with water. My thoughts, revolving around Zeke Patterson's words, were just as blurry and unclear. The brakes. They did something to the brakes on my car. My husband, with whom I had lived for almost half a century, and my niece, whom I had once held in my arms as a newborn, had conspired to kill me. The thought didn't fit in my head. It seemed absurd, but deep down, I knew it was true. There had been too many strange things happening in recent days, too many unnatural coincidences. Garth sat next to me, unusually quiet. His fingers drummed on his knee, an old habit that appeared when he was nervous. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, the man I considered my life partner. Now he seemed like a stranger in a familiar shell. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing my gaze. "You seem tense." "I'm fine," I replied. "Just thinking about my father." The lie came easily. Over the years of marriage, I had learned to hide my true thoughts and feelings. It was a small defense mechanism that many women of my generation had developed, living with men who were not accustomed to emotional openness. "Don't worry," Garth patted my arm with feigned concern. "Whatever's in the will, we'll manage." We. How easily that word rolled off his tongue, as if we were still one, a team, a family, as if he wasn't planning my death. The taxi stopped in front of an old brick building in downtown Richmond. Garth paid the driver and helped me out, holding my elbow with exaggerated gallantry. His fingers were cold and clammy. "Are you nervous?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. He looked away too quickly. "Why would I be? It's your father, not mine." We entered the building. Obadiah Frost's law office was on the third floor. In the elevator, Garth kept looking at his watch, as if afraid of being late. Or maybe he was just counting the minutes since I was supposed to get into the sabotaged car. How much time did he allow for my death? How long would it take for the brakes to fail, the car to crash into a tree or slide into a ditch? The lawyer's reception area was decorated in a strict classical style: dark wood, leather chairs, subdued lighting. A secretary sat at the desk, a middle-aged woman with perfect hair and an attentive gaze. "Mr. and Mrs. Lander?" she asked. "Mr. Frost is expecting you. The others are already here." The others. So Beryl had already arrived. I wondered when she was supposed to receive the news of my tragic death. The secretary led us into a spacious office with tall windows. Obadiah Frost sat behind a massive desk, a tall, thin man in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and piercing eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. I saw Beryl in one of the chairs in front of the desk. My niece looked impeccable: expensive suit, perfect makeup, fashionable haircut. Her whole posture radiated confidence and impatience. When we entered, she turned around, and for a split second, her face froze in an expression of undisguised shock. Then she quickly pulled herself together and forced a smile. "Aunt Eunice!" "Uncle Garth? You decided to come together after all?" Her voice sounded surprised, mixed with disappointment. But far more eloquent was the look she gave Garth. Quick, questioning, accusatory. I looked at my husband. He stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale. He clearly hadn't expected to see Beryl here. Or perhaps he hadn't expected her to arrive before us. Something hadn't gone according to plan. "Please have a seat," Obadiah Frost said, rising from the table and extending his hand to me. "Mrs. Lander, please accept my condolences." Your father was an outstanding man. I shook his hand, dry and cool, and took a chair next to Beryl. Garth sat awkwardly on the other side, not looking at me or his niece. "Thank you, Mr. Frost," I replied. He was truly an extraordinary person. "Hammond was my client for over 30 years," the lawyer continued, returning to his seat. "I must say, he was a man of strong principles and clear thinking until the very end." Beryl leaned forward. "Mr. Frost, I think we'd all like to get down to business. After all, We all have busy schedules. Busy schedules. I wonder if Beryl's schedule included my death today. Did she have a meeting with the police after reporting my accident? Or maybe she was going to visit the morgue to identify the body. Of course, Miss Lander. Frost nodded and opened the folder in front of him. I will read the last will and testament of Hammond Lander. All formalities have been completed, and the document has been duly certified. He began reading the standard legal text. Dates, full names, wording. I listened with half an ear, watching Garth and Beryl's reactions. They both leaned forward, tense, like hunting dogs that had caught the scent of game. Their eyes showed the same greed. Moving on to the distribution of assets, Frost continued after a long introduction. Mr. Lander has made the following dispositions. To his granddaughter, Beryl Edna Lander, he leaves the sum of $500,000, as well as the family collection of antiques, with the exception of the items specifically listed in Appendix A. Beryl sat up straight. Her face showed confusion, which quickly turned to indignation. She opened her mouth to say something, but the lawyer gestured for her to stop. To his son-in-law, Hart Ivan Lander, he continued, Hammond leaves a Bentley Continental GT, model year 2020, as well as a Patek Philippe watch from his personal collection. Garth made a strange sound, something between a chuckle and a sob. His fingers dug into the armrests of his chair with such force that his knuckles turned white. The remaining assets, including fixed capital, real estate, 60% of the shares in Lander Home Supplies, all bank accounts and investment portfolios, except those specifically mentioned in Appendix B, shall pass to his daughter, Eunice Marte Lander. The office fell silent, so deep that I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Beryl sat motionless, her face frozen like a mask. Garth stared into space, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I myself could hardly believe what I was hearing. 60% of the shares. A controlling stake. My father had left me control of the company he had built from scratch and to which he had devoted his entire life. A company that was now worth tens, if not hundreds, of millions of dollars. There is also a personal letter for you, Mrs. Lander. Frost handed me a sealed envelope. Your father asked that it be given to you personally after the will was read. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of the thick paper. The name on the envelope was written in my father's familiar angular handwriting. Beryl stared at the envelope greedily. Is that all? She asked sharply. 500,000 and a few old vases, after everything I've done for the company? Obadiah Frost looked at her with professional calm. That is your grandfather's decision, Miss Lander. The will is properly drafted, certified, and cannot be contested. Mr. Lander was of sound mind and memory when he signed it 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Beryl repeated, her voice trembling with anger. After I reorganized the entire sales department, after I took the company to a new level of profitability? Beryl, I spoke up for the first time, this is not the place for such discussions. She turned to me, and I saw undisguised hatred in her eyes. At that moment, I realized that Beryl was truly prepared to kill me for the inheritance. What is this place for, Aunt Eunice? Her voice was dripping with venom. For your triumph? That's what you've been striving for all along, isn't it? You wormed your way into grandfather's trust in his old age, manipulated him, made him change his will. Beryl! Garth finally snapped out of his stupor. That's an inappropriate tone. Shut up! She turned sharply to him. You should have. She stopped short, glancing quickly at the lawyer. You should have supported me. We're family. I watched this exchange, and everything fell into place. Beryl and Garth clearly had a plan that hadn't worked out, a plan in which I wasn't supposed to be at this meeting, a plan in which they somehow expected to get my inheritance. Mr. Frost, I addressed the lawyer. Is there a clause in the will about what will happen to my share in the event of my death? The lawyer looked surprised, but hid it professionally. Yes, there is such a clause. In the event of your death, your share of the company will be transferred to a specially created trust fund, which will use the dividends to support various charitable organizations that your father supported. The shares themselves cannot be sold or transferred to other persons for 20 years after your death. I heard Garth gasp sharply. Beryl turned pale. What about the rest of the estate? I asked. Real estate and personal property must be distributed according to your personal will, if you have one. If not, then the standard inheritance rules of the state of Virginia dictate that your spouse will receive everything. So that was it. Now I understood the plan. If I had died before the will was read, Garth would have received my personal assets as my legal spouse, and Beryl probably expected him to share with her. But the controlling stake in the company, the most valuable asset, would have slipped away from both of them. They didn't know about the trust fund. They didn't know that my father had made such a provision. And now that their plan had failed, they both sat before me, crushed and angry. Especially Beryl, who had apparently expected a much larger share of the inheritance than $500,000. There's one more thing, Frost continued, flipping through the pages. Mr. Lander has appointed you, Mrs. Lander, as chair of the board of directors of Lander Home Supplies, effective immediately. The will specifically states that the current CEO, Miss Beryl Lander, may retain her position subject to your approval. Beryl jumped up, her face contorted with rage. That's ridiculous! I've been running the company for the last 3 years. I've increased profits by 30%. And now I have to report to a woman who has never shown any interest in the family business? Sit down, Miss Lander. Frost's voice was calm but firm. That is your grandfather's decision. If you disagree with it, you are always free to resign. Beryl slumped back into her chair, her eyes flashing. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll contest the will. I'll prove that grandfather was incompetent when he signed it. You are free to try, Frost replied. But I must warn you that Mr. Lander anticipated this possibility. The will was drawn up in the presence of 2 independent witnesses, including his personal physician, who confirmed his capacity. In addition, the entire procedure was recorded on video. Beryl looked as if she had been struck. She opened her mouth, but couldn't utter a word. Garth sat motionless the whole time, his gaze wandering around the room, focusing on nothing in particular. I could almost physically feel the gears turning feverishly in his head as he tried to find a way out of a situation that had completely spiraled out of control. Do you have any questions, Mrs. Lander? Frost asked, turning to me. Yes. I straightened up in my chair. When can I start my duties at the company? Immediately, he replied. All the necessary documents are ready. You just need to sign them, and I will notify the board of directors of the change in management. Beryl made a sound like a growl. You don't understand anything about running a company, Aunt Eunice. You've been an accountant your whole life, a small, insignificant cog in other people's machines. And I built an empire. An empire founded by my father, I replied calmly. And maybe I don't really understand modern management methods, but I do understand people. And numbers. I turned to the lawyer. Mr. Frost, I would like to conduct an immediate audit of the company. A complete and independent one. Can you recommend a reliable firm? Beryl's face changed. Fear flashed in her eyes, quickly replaced by anger. You have no right! I won't let some auditors dig through my documents. The company's documents, I corrected her. The company whose controlling stake now belongs to me. Garth finally snapped out of his stupor. He put his hand on Beryl's shoulder, as if trying to calm her down. "I think we all need time to process this," he said in a conciliatory tone. "It's been a difficult day for all of us. Eunice just lost her father. Beryl lost her grandfather. Let's not make any rash decisions." His hand on Beryl's shoulder, the intimacy of the gesture, the sudden desire to protect her, all of this spoke louder than any words. I looked at my husband, and he avoided my gaze, for the first time in 48 years of marriage, truly unable to meet my eyes. "I agree that we all need time," I replied, "but some decisions can't wait. Mr. Frost, I'll sign the papers today, and I want the audit to start as soon as possible." The lawyer nodded. "I'll contact Hampton and Associates. They can start tomorrow." "You'll regret this," Beryl hissed, jumping up from her seat. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." She grabbed her bag and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned around. "And you," she pointed her finger at Garth, "we'll talk later. You had one job. One." With that, she stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. Garth sat with his head down, his shoulders slumped. He looked old and lost, like a man who had suddenly had the rug pulled out from under him. "Do you want to wait for me?" I asked him. "I need to sign some papers. It might take a while." He raised his head, and for a moment, something like shame flashed in his eyes. But only for a moment. "Yes, of course," he replied. "I'll wait in the reception area." When the door closed behind him, Obadiah Frost looked at me intently. "Mrs. Lander, I don't want to interfere in family matters, but it seems to me that you are in a difficult situation." "You have no idea how difficult," I replied, taking my father's letter out of my bag. "But I'll manage." I have no choice. I opened the envelope and began to read the last words of a man who had been both a source of pride and disappointment, love and resentment for me throughout my life. A man who, as it turned out, understood much more than I had imagined. I returned home late in the evening. Garth had called in sick and left immediately after his meeting with the lawyer, leaving me alone to deal with the paperwork. I didn't mind. I needed time and space to process everything that had happened and read my father's letter in private. The house greeted me with emptiness and silence. I walked into the living room without turning on the lights and sank into my favorite chair. Outside the windows, a light rain was falling, blurring the outlines of the garden. Strangely, I felt an unusual clarity of thought, as if a veil that had been hiding reality had suddenly fallen away. My father's letter still echoed in my head. "Eunice," he wrote in his angular handwriting, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer alive. I am sorry for all the years of misunderstanding between us. I wasn't a good father, but I always respected your intelligence and your honesty. That's why I'm entrusting you with the company I've dedicated my life to. Be careful with Beryl. She's like me when I was young, ambitious, and unprincipled. She considers the company her birthright, but true rights are not given by birth, but by character. And I believe that you will be able to protect what I have created from those who see only money and power in it. Be on your guard. There may be people in your immediate circle who cannot be trusted." My father knew, or at least he suspected. But why didn't he tell me directly? Why didn't he warn me about Garth? Or did he not know about the conspiracy between my husband and my niece? Maybe his suspicions were only about Beryl? I sat in the dark for a while longer, listening to the ticking of the clock and the sound of the rain. Then I got up decisively. It was time to act. It was time to find out the truth. First, I called the car service and asked them to tow my car away for inspection. It would be reckless to leave it in the driveway, knowing that something had been done to it. Besides, I needed proof of sabotage. Then I headed to Garth's office. I was lucky. In his rush, He had apparently forgotten to lock his desk drawers, or perhaps he thought I was already dead and wouldn't be able to search them. The office looked the same as usual, a little messy, with stacks of old engineering magazines that Garth collected but rarely read. His diplomas and certificates hung on the wall, faded with age, silent witnesses to a career that never reached the heights he had dreamed of. I methodically began to look through the contents of the drawers. In the top one, I found the usual office supplies, bills, and receipts. In the second, there were folders with documents about the house, insurance policies, and warranty cards for appliances. Nothing unusual or suspicious. But in the bottom drawer, under a stack of old catalogs, I found a small box I had never seen before. It was wooden, with a simple lock that opened easily. Inside were letters, dozens of letters tied with a red ribbon. I untied the ribbon and took the top envelope. It was addressed to Hart, with no return address. I took out the letter and began to read. My dear H, there is nothing worse than this waiting. Every day I wake up thinking about you, about us, about the future we could have had. If only circumstances were different, if only there weren't these chains holding you back. Sometimes I hate her for simply existing, for being an obstacle between us. But you ask for patience, and I will wait. After all, she is not eternal, none of us are. And when our time comes, nothing can separate us. Always yours, B. I reread the letter twice, feeling the blood run cold in my veins. By Beryl. My niece was writing love letters to my husband, and judging by the content, they were waiting for my death to be together. I looked through the other letters. They were dated over the last 3 years, the period when Beryl returned to Richmond to work for her father's company. They were all full of passion, longing, and barely concealed impatience. Some mentioned specific meetings, secret rendezvous in motels outside the city, weekends when I went to visit friends. The last letter was dated a week earlier. Gee, everything is changing. Grandfather is dying. His heart is failing. The doctors say it's a matter of days. We must be ready. I know you have doubts, but there is no other way. When it's all over, we'll be free and rich. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Don't be afraid, the plan is flawless. We'll discuss everything when we meet. Yours forever, B. Now everything fell into place. They knew about my father's imminent death. They knew about the will, or at least guessed that I would receive a significant portion of the inheritance, and they decided to get rid of me in order to take possession of it. I carefully put the letters back in the box and placed it on the table. Then I continued my search. In the far corner of the drawer, I found a worn notebook. Opening it, I saw notes written in Garth's hand, sketches of some kind of mechanism, diagrams, calculations. A folded piece of paper was tucked between the pages. I unfolded it and saw a printout from YouTube. Instructions on how to disable a car's braking system. My fingers clenched the paper so tightly that my knuckles turned white. They really were planning to kill me. Not in theory, not in abstract reasoning, but in practice, with concrete steps and preparation. I took pictures of everything with my phone, the letters, the notebook, the instructions. Then I carefully put everything back in its place, except for Beryl's last letter and the printout. I decided to keep that evidence, but that wasn't enough. I needed to know more. I needed to talk to Zeke Patterson, the only witness to their actions. I knew where to find him. When the weather was nice, Zeke usually sat on a bench in a small park near our house. When it rained, he took shelter at Peggy's, where the owner let him sit for hours with a cup of coffee. I took a taxi to the diner. Inside, it was warm and cozy, smelling of coffee and pastries. At a table by the window sat Zeke, his arms wrapped around a large mug. He looked tired and a little worn out, but his eyes were clear and alert. When he saw me, he sat up straight, surprise reflected on his face. Mrs. Lander, he said when I approached the table. I'm glad to see you, alive. Thanks to you, I replied, sitting down opposite him. May I join you? Of course, he nodded. Would you like some coffee? I can. It's on me, I interrupted, calling the waitress over. 2 coffees, please, and something to eat for Mr. Patterson. A turkey sandwich, please, Zeke said after a short pause. If possible. When the waitress left, I leaned toward him. I need to know everything you saw. In detail, Zeke took a sip from his mug, gathering his thoughts. I was in the neighborhood because I sometimes do odd jobs for Mrs. Phelps on Maple Street. I help with the garden when her son is busy. It was late that evening, around 9, as I said. I was walking past your house and saw a flashlight under a car in the driveway. He paused when the waitress came over with our order. After she left, he continued, I stopped because it looked suspicious. It was as if someone was trying to steal the car or something like that. I hid behind the trash cans of the neighboring house and watched. That's when I saw your husband. He was lying under the car, and a young woman was standing next to him, holding a flashlight and saying something to him. Did you hear what they were talking about? I asked. Not everything, Zeke shook his head. But I caught some of it. The woman said something like, Are you sure this will work? It has to look like an accident. And your husband replied, The brakes will fail at high speed. She'll lose control. No one will suspect anything. I felt nausea rising in my throat. Hearing your own husband cold-bloodedly plan your death is not for the faint of heart. Did you get a good look at the woman? Yes, Zeke nodded. Young, in her early 30s. Dark hair, expensive clothes. Very confident. Bossed your husband around. Called him darling and sweetheart. That's my niece Beryl, I said. My late brother's daughter. Zeke whistled. Family, then. What did they disagree about? Money, I replied simply. A lot of money. My father died and left me a fortune that they were counting on getting. Zeke chewed his sandwich slowly, thinking about what he had heard. What are you going to do now, Mrs. Lander? Good question. What was I going to do? Go to the police? With what evidence? The letters didn't prove intent to kill, only adultery. The homeless man's testimony would hardly be taken seriously, and Garth and Beryl could have restored the car to its normal condition long ago, knowing that their plan had failed. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I can't just forget about it and move on, pretending nothing happened. Of course you can't, Zeke agreed. They tried once. They might try again. He was right. I couldn't feel safe in my own home, knowing that the person I shared a roof with wanted me dead. There's something else, Zeke continued, lowering his voice. That night, after they finished with the car, they didn't leave right away. They hugged and kissed right there on the driveway, and they talked about the future, about how they would live in your house after you died, how they would spend the money. The man seemed impatient. He said he was tired of waiting, and the woman calmed him down, promising that everything would change soon. The pain of betrayal that I had been holding back until now suddenly surged with new force. I imagined them, Garth and Beryl, embracing in front of the house we had built together, dreaming of my death, planning their lives at my funeral. Thank you, Zeke, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. You saved my life. I won't forget that. I'm glad I was there, he smiled, slightly embarrassed. You know, Mrs. Lander, I've been watching you for years. You're the only one in this neighborhood who talks to me like a person, not like a problem or an invisible person. You deserve better. I took an envelope out of my bag and placed it on the table. There's $5,000 in here, I said. This isn't payment for information, but gratitude for saving my life. Use it to rent a room, get yourself cleaned up. Maybe find a job. Zeke stared at the envelope suspiciously. Mrs. Lander, I can't. You can, I said, covering his hand with mine. And one more request. If my husband or niece come looking for you, don't tell them you met with me. Be careful. They're dangerous people. He nodded, still looking at the envelope. I'll be careful. And thank you, Mrs. Lander. When I got home, I found that Garth was still gone. His car wasn't in the driveway, and the house was quiet. I suspected he was with Beryl, discussing their next move. I went up to our bedroom and started packing. Staying in this house with a man who had planned my death would be madness. I decided to leave today, without waiting for him to return. After packing the essentials into a small suitcase, I went down to the living room and sat in an armchair, waiting for the taxi I had called. My gaze wandered around the room, lingering on familiar objects, framed photographs, souvenirs from trips, books on the shelves. 48 years of my life were contained within these walls. 48 years that were ending now, on this rainy evening. The front door opened, making me jump. I heard footsteps in the hallway, and a moment later, Garth entered the living room. He looked tired and tense. Seeing me sitting in the dark, he froze. Eunice! Why are you sitting in the dark? Just thinking, I replied simply. He flicked the light switch, and the room was filled with light. His gaze fell on the suitcase at my feet. Are you going somewhere? I'm leaving you, Garth. He froze, his face turning pale. What? Why? Because of the will? Eunice, I know it's been a difficult day, but we need to talk calmly. It's not because of the will, I interrupted him. It's because you and Beryl planned my death. I expected him to deny it, to get angry, to feign offended innocence. But Garth just stood there, paralyzed, his face frozen in an expression of shock and fear. I don't understand what you're talking about, he finally managed to say. You see, I stood up, looking him straight in the eye. You sabotaged the brakes on my car. You wanted me to die on my way to the lawyer. Then you would have gotten my share of the inheritance as my legal spouse. And then you and Beryl would have lived happily ever after, enjoying my money. That's absurd! He finally found his voice. Who told you that? That vagrant? Do you believe a homeless alcoholic more than your own husband? I believe my own eyes, I replied calmly. And the letters Beryl has been writing to you for the last 3 years. And the instructions for disabling the brake system that you kept in your desk. Garth turned even paler. He sank into a chair as if his legs refused to hold him up. You went through my things? Yes. I saw no point in denying it. After I found out that my husband was planning to kill me, I decided I had a right to know the details. He covered his face with his hands. You don't understand, Eunice. It's not what it looks like. Explain it to me, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. Explain how it really looks. Because it seems to me that my husband and my niece are in a romantic relationship and tried to kill me for money. Where am I wrong? Garth raised his head. There were tears in his eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were real or just another act. Beryl, she's very convincing. She knows how to make you believe that her plan is the only right one. She said that your father was unfair, that she deserved the company more than you, that you would just get everything for free while she had worked for years. And you decided that the best way to fix this injustice was to kill me? My voice sounded icy calm, which I didn't actually feel. I didn't want you to die. He shook his head. We just wanted you to have a little accident, serious enough that you wouldn't be able to attend the reading of the will. We thought that if you weren't there, the lawyer would transfer your share to me as your representative. And then I could gradually transfer control of the company to Beryl. We didn't plan your death. Lies. Lies again. Even now, with his back against the wall, he continued to lie. But you talked about the brakes, I reminded him. Zeke heard you. The brakes will fail at high speed. She'll lose control. Those were your words, Garth. He swallowed, looking away. Beryl, she said it would look like an accident. But I didn't believe it would come to murder, I finished for him. But that's what it was leading to. You sabotaged my car so that I would die. The taxi honked from the street. I picked up my suitcase. I'm leaving, Garth. Don't try to find me. Don't call. Don't write. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce. Eunice, please. He stood up, reaching out to me. We can fix this. I'll break up with Beryl, I swear. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. You can't just throw away 48 years of marriage. You threw them away when you decided that my money and your young mistress were more important than my life. I replied, heading for the door. Goodbye, Garth. I left the house without looking back. The rain had intensified, but I hardly noticed it. I got into a taxi and gave the address of a hotel in the city center, a place where no one would look for me. When the car started moving, I finally allowed myself to cry, not out of grief or regret, but out of relief. I had broken free from the web of lies and betrayal that had entangled me for years. I was free, and I was ready for the battle that lay ahead, because Beryl wasn't going to give up the company without a fight. And Garth could be more dangerous than he seemed. Desperation makes people unpredictable, but I was no longer naive. I knew the truth, and the truth was my weapon. I spent 3 days at the Jefferson Hotel in downtown Richmond, thinking about my next steps. My phone was ringing off the hook with calls from Garth, but I didn't answer. He left messages, first pleading, then angry, then pleading again. I listened to them with a kind of detached curiosity, as if studying the behavior of an unfamiliar species. I managed to get a lot done during those days. I hired a private investigator to keep an eye on Garth and Beryl. I met with a mechanic who inspected my car and confirmed that the brake system had been deliberately damaged. I opened a new bank account and transferred some of my personal savings to it. I ordered a new phone with a number known only to my most trusted friends. But most importantly, I was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. It had to happen. I couldn't just disappear from my life and leave Garth and Beryl unpunished, not only for the sake of justice, but also for my own safety. As long as they believed they could get to me, I was in danger. On the 4th day, I decided it was time to act. I called Obadiah Frost and arranged to meet him at his office at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then, I sent identical messages to Garth and Beryl. Today at 1 o'clock. Garth and Eunice's house. We need to talk. Yours truly, I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one. But I was sure they would come. There was too much at stake. At noon, I returned to the house I had shared with Garth for almost half a century. It was a strange feeling to enter my own home and feel like a stranger there. Everything looked familiar, and yet somehow wrong, as if a thin film of falsehood covered every object. I went into the living room and sat down in my chair, placing my bag on my lap. Inside the bag were copies of all the evidence I had collected: Beryl's letters, a printout of instructions on how to disable the brakes, the mechanic's report, and Zeke's testimony, recorded on a dictaphone with his consent. I left the originals in the hotel safe, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid to me before, but now seemed perfectly reasonable. At exactly 1 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. A couple of minutes later, the front door opened and Garth entered the house. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. When he saw me in the living room, he froze in the doorway. "Eunice," he said with relief, "you're back." "Just for a chat," I replied calmly. "Sit down." He sank into the sofa opposite me, never taking his eyes off me. I was so worried. You weren't answering your phone. No one knew where you were. And that's good, I interrupted him. Considering that you and Beryl were planning my death, I prefer to keep my whereabouts a secret. Eunice, please. He leaned forward, his face contorted with despair. You have to listen to me. I can explain everything. Explain attempted murder? I raised an eyebrow. I'd love to hear that. At that moment, the front door slammed again, and Beryl entered the living room. Unlike Garth, she looked composed and determined. Expensive suit, flawless makeup, head held high. Only her eyes betrayed her tension. Cold, calculating, appraising. Aunt Eunice, she said with feigned warmth. How dramatic of you to disappear and then summon us as if for questioning. Sit down, Beryl, I said in the same calm tone. We have a serious conversation to have. She sank gracefully into a chair, crossing her legs. I'm all ears. I looked at them both, my husband and my niece, the two people closest to me, who had betrayed me in the most terrible way. Strangely, I felt neither anger nor pain. Only cold determination. I know about your affair, I began, looking directly at Beryl. I know about your plans for my father's inheritance. And I know what you did to my car to prevent me from getting to my meeting with the lawyer. Garth turned pale. Beryl remained impassive, only slightly clenching her fingers on the armrest of her chair. Those are serious accusations, Aunt Eunice, she said with a slight smile. Do you have any proof? More than enough, I patted my bag. The letters you wrote to Garth. The mechanic's report on the deliberate damage to my car's brake system. The testimony of a witness who saw you two working on the car the night before the will was read. What witness? Garth asked sharply. Zeke Patterson, the homeless man who warned me not to get in the car. He saw and heard everything. Beryl laughed, but it sounded forced. A homeless alcoholic? Seriously, Aunt Eunice? Do you think anyone will believe his word against ours? Actually, yes, I replied, especially when his testimony is backed up by a technical report and other evidence. Besides, Zeke was a philosophy professor before he started drinking. He knows how to express his thoughts very convincingly. I took a copy of the mechanic's report out of my bag and placed it on the coffee table. Intentional damage to the brake line, which would result in a gradual loss of brake fluid and brake failure under heavy use. I read aloud. Just as you planned, right? Enough for me to reach the highway, pick up speed, and then be unable to brake on the turn. Garth covered his face with his hands. Beryl continued to remain calm, but I could see her knuckles turning white. What do you want, Aunt Eunice? She asked bluntly. Money. My share of the inheritance? I want you both to understand the seriousness of the situation, I replied. You planned a murder. This is not a family quarrel or a business dispute. It is a criminal offense for which you could spend the rest of your lives in prison. Garth raised his head, his eyes red. Eunice, please. His voice trembled. I never wanted you dead. It was a momentary lapse of judgment. Beryl said it was the only way. Shut up, Garth! Beryl cut him off sharply. Don't say another word. She turned to me, and the mask of politeness fell from her face. All right, Aunt Eunice, let's be honest. Yes, Garth and I are in a relationship. Yes, we wanted to get your share of the inheritance. But we never planned to kill you. We just wanted to delay your appearance at the reading of the will. By causing a high-speed accident? I shook my head. Don't lie to me, Beryl. I read your letters. When it's all over, we'll be free and rich. You were waiting for me to die. Those are just words, she shrugged. Romantic exaggerations. Love letters shouldn't be taken literally. What about the instructions for disabling the brakes? Shouldn't those be taken literally either? Beryl shot Garth an angry look. Did you keep those damn instructions? I told you to get rid of everything. I forgot, Garth muttered, shrinking under her gaze. I was upset when the plan didn't work, and I forgot. You never do anything right, Beryl exclaimed, jumping up from her chair. Your whole life is a series of failures and mistakes. I watched this scene with a strange detachment. How quickly their facade of love and care crumbled. How easily they resorted to mutual accusations. Beryl, I said, getting her attention, I know you were the driving force behind this plan. But that doesn't absolve Garth of guilt. You both planned my murder. And now you have to face the consequences. And what are they? She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. Are you going to go to the police? Make a public scandal? Disgrace your family? Disgrace yourself? If necessary, I replied calmly. Think about what you're doing. Beryl lowered her voice, resorting to threats. Do you want all of Richmond to know that your husband chose a woman half his age over you? Do you want everyone to discuss how you couldn't keep the man you lived with for almost 50 years? Do you want people to pity you? I smiled, and that smile silenced her. You see, Beryl, at my age, you don't care much about what other people think, especially when it's a matter of life and death. Yes, people will talk. Some will pity me, some will condemn me, but I'll be alive. And you and Garth will be in prison. Garth suddenly got up from the sofa and knelt in front of me. Eunice, please! His voice broke. Don't do this. I know I made a terrible mistake. I let Beryl manipulate me, let my worst instincts take over. But I'm sorry, I swear. Give me a chance to make it right. I looked at him, gray-haired, hunched over, his hands shaking, and felt nothing. No love, no hate, not even pity. Just exhaustion and a desire to end this charade. Stand up, Garth! You look ridiculous. He stood up, his face contorted with hurt and shame. You've always been so cold, he whispered. Always so unapproachable. Maybe if you had taken more interest in me, my feelings, my needs. Don't you dare blame her! Beryl suddenly intervened, her voice ringing with fury. You're a pathetic, weak man, Garth. You came to me yourself, remember? You complained about your cold wife, about how she didn't understand you, didn't appreciate you. You begged me for attention, for intimacy. And now you're trying to blame me for everything? They stood facing each other, forgetting my presence, spilling out years of pent-up irritation and resentment. I watched them like actors in a bad play. Enough, I finally said, rising from my chair. I don't want to listen to your mutual accusations anymore. Here's what's going to happen. I'm filing for divorce, Garth, immediately. And I'm going to use all the evidence I've gathered to make sure you don't get a penny of my fortune. I turned to Beryl. As for you, I will inform the board of directors of your dismissal today. The company audit will continue, and if any financial irregularities on your part are discovered, and I am sure they will be, you will be held fully responsible for them. You can't do that, Beryl exclaimed. The company is my life. I've put my whole self into it. You should have thought about that before you planned my murder, I replied calmly. Consider yourself lucky. I'm not going to the police yet. But if any of you try to threaten me, harass me, or interfere with my life in any way, all this evidence will end up with the district attorney. Is that clear? They were silent, both pale and confused. Garth looked broken. Beryl looked furious, but cornered. I'm leaving this house, I continued. Don't try to contact me. All further communication will be through my lawyer. I headed for the exit, but turned around at the door. And one more thing. I know you can be dangerous when you're cornered, so I'm warning you, all the evidence of your crime is in a safe place. If anything happens to me, an accident, sudden illness, whatever, that evidence will automatically be handed over to the authorities, so it's in your best interest to keep me safe and sound. Beryl took a step forward, her eyes flashing. You can't just walk away and ruin our lives. We won't let you. You already made your choice when you decided to ruin my life, I replied. Now live with the consequences. I left the house without looking back. A taxi was already waiting for me on the street. Getting into the car, I gave the driver the address of Obadiah Frost's office. The city floated by outside the window, but I hardly noticed it. Fragments of the conversation spun around in my head, the faces of Garth and Beryl, their words and reactions. They were both trying to manipulate me. Garth through pity, Beryl through fear. But they didn't understand that I was already beyond their influence. Their betrayal had freed me from all obligations to them. Frost's office was in the same elegant building where the will had been read. The secretary recognized me and immediately showed me into the lawyer's office. Mrs. Lander! Frost rose to greet me, his face expressing professional concern. You look upset. Has something happened? A lot, Mr. Frost, I replied, sitting down in the chair he offered me. And I need your help. I briefly outlined the situation, omitting the emotional details and focusing on the facts. The attempted murder, the affair between my husband and my niece, their plans to take over my inheritance. Then I laid out copies of the evidence on the table. Frost listened attentively, looked through the documents, his face becoming increasingly serious. Mrs. Lander, he said finally, these are very serious allegations. With this evidence, you could file a report with the police. Your husband and niece could be arrested for attempted murder. I know, I nodded, but I don't want to involve the police right now. Too much noise, too much attention. I prefer a more discreet approach. I understand, he said, folding his fingers into a house shape. What do you want to do? First, I want to start divorce proceedings, immediately, and I want to make sure that Garth doesn't get anything from my estate. With this evidence, that won't be difficult. Frost nodded. What else? I want to remove Beryl as CEO of the company and remove her from the board of directors. I have a controlling stake, so I have the authority to do that, right? Right, but certain procedures must be followed. A shareholders' meeting, a vote by the board of directors. However, with your stake, the outcome is a foregone conclusion. Okay, I nodded. Start the process as soon as possible. And one more thing. I want to make sure that Garth and Beryl can't hurt me. They're both desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. Frost thought for a moment. I can file a protective order on your behalf. This will prohibit them from approaching you, your home, or your workplace. Any contact on their part will be considered a violation of the court order, with all the consequences that entails. Do it, I agreed. And I also need help finding a new place to live. I can't go back to that house. Of course, Frost made a note in his notebook. I have a real estate agent friend who specializes in luxury properties. He'll find something suitable for you in a safe neighborhood. We discussed a few more details, and Frost promised to contact me as soon as the first legal steps were taken. As I was about to leave, he stopped me with a question. Mrs. Lander, forgive me for asking a personal question, but how are you holding up? Such betrayal by those closest to you is a heavy blow. I thought for a moment. You know, Mr. Frost, at my age, you begin to understand that life rarely lives up to our expectations. The people we love disappoint us. Those we trust betray us. But the opposite is also true. Sometimes we find support and kindness where we least expect it. I remembered Zeke Patterson, the homeless philosopher who saved my life. I'll be fine, I added with a confidence I actually felt. At 73, I'm starting a new life. It's scary, but also liberating. Frost smiled with sincere respect. If I may say so, Mrs. Lander, your father knew what he was doing when he entrusted the company to you. You have a steely character. I smiled back. He always said I was too stubborn. Maybe now that quality will finally come in handy. Leaving Frost's office, I didn't call a taxi right away. Instead, I walked around downtown Richmond for a while, watching people rushing about their business. Young couples holding hands, businessmen with briefcases, mothers with children, old people basking in the sun on park benches. They were all living their lives, with their joys and sorrows, hopes and disappointments. And somewhere among them was me, a 73-year-old woman who had just lost everything she considered her family, but had gained something more valuable: freedom and truth. Yes, it was a painful process. Yes, there are still many trials ahead. But for the first time in many years, I felt truly alive. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and I finally saw the world as it really is, without illusions or self-deception. My husband and my niece wanted to kill me for money. It was a monstrous betrayal that destroyed all my ideas about family and intimacy. But it also freed me from false obligations and revealed the true nature of the people I considered close to me. Now I could move forward, relying on this truth, however bitter it was. And this thought, strangely enough, brought comfort.